Hello, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing good. So today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I want to share the story of how narc abuse drove me legally insane, but ultimately saved me and led me on the path of going no contact. So back in around 2015, I reached the peak of my career and got this fabulous job, excellent salary, increased responsibility. It was the perfect job for me. I was very skilled in the particular thing that I was doing. But the imposter syndrome that we all have, that's been drummed into us by our narcs, kicked in, and I was panicking. I was thinking, I'm not good enough for this. What am I doing? I'm going to make an idiot of myself. So I rang my father and I told him all this. And instead of a normal fatherly response of, you can do this, you're a smart girl, you've worked all your life to reach this point, you're qualified, I got the entitled loser speech and was told, you made your bed, now lie in it. And he hung up. And following that, I descended into hallucinations. I seeing things that weren't there, hearing things that weren't there. I thought my flat was bugged. I thought there were snipers after me. It was about a week of spiraling. And a friend of mine realized something was wrong through my phone calls and my Facebook activity. And he was hundreds of miles away, but he arranged an ambulance to come to my flat. And I was taken away to the emergency room and put in a side room, which I now realise was a kind of triage for mental health cases. And I phoned my father, and obviously I was a little bit all over the shop in my speech. And his response was, you sound like a lunatic. And he hung up on me. And then, not long after, my friend phoned me and said, I phoned your parents to let them know what was happening. And they were not very polite. This is his very kind way of saying they gave him a mouthful of abuse. Then later on, my father phoned me and was yelling and said, a strange man phoned us in the middle of the day, like they have this grand schedule. So on I went to the next stage of being assessed. I was put in a room, I was observed, I was interviewed by various doctors. And the next thing I knew, I was being escorted to the mental hospital, and I was placed under what we call in the UK a section, which is an involuntary hold. And initially, it was 28 days. And then I realised that the hospital had contacted my father because the law back then stated that an unmarried woman with no dependents, her father is the next in line to make medical decisions. So this in particular, this is something that you need to consider when going no contact, especially if you have mental health issues, is to, what I did, I wrote a letter to my GP saying, my father, my mother and my brother do not have the right to make medical decisions. We are estranged. I want any medical decisions to be made by my GP. He knows me better than my family. And I looked into getting some kind of legal protection from them. And it's something I'm continuing to look into. And I think as my relationship develops with my auntie and my uncle, they may become my next of kin. But that's something important to consider. Another thing, it sounds quite minor, but from friends of mine that are in the emergency services, if you get into an accident and you're unable to communicate, they'll go through your mobile phone, and the first person that they will call will be whoever is listed as mum or dad. So my advice would be, if you're going to keep them in your contacts list, change those names. I changed mine. I won't tell you what they are because YouTube won't allow it. And have somebody that you trust put ICE, which stands for in case of emergency. So that's something just to cover yourself, just so, if you're in an accident, they don't get your narcs to make decisions. So anyway, I was in the hospital for 3 months after my father signed me off. And that they, of course, didn't visit, they didn't send cards, they had zero interest. And the hospital actually contacted them to say, come in for family therapy, which would have put the fear of God into them, because their worst nightmare is an external influence on their victim telling them what's happening isn't right, this is abuse, you need to get out. So I think my hospitalization terrified them. And I got out of hospital eventually. And of course, the job was long gone. And I was then evicted from my flat because my landlady didn't want a crazy person as a tenant, which of course is highly illegal, but there we go. And I was desperately trying to find somewhere to live. I was now on state disability benefits, and it's illegal now, but back then, estate agents were not giving flats to people on benefits because there is a stigma around them. And I looked and I looked, I couldn't find anywhere, but then I eventually found a house share. And the rub was they needed a guarantor. A guarantor meaning if I can't pay rent, that person does. So very, very reluctantly, because I haven't relied on my family for anything since I left home, I asked my dad, will you be guarantor? My dad, who has a mansion and he's extremely wealthy. And his response was absolutely not. Even though ever since 1994 I've paid rent in full on time every month, everywhere I've lived. And so I became homeless. And I did get somewhere eventually through the council. And while at the time I was homeless, I was planning to end my life. That was, the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Everything had happened at once. I was put on a new medication. I brightened up. I felt a little bit better. The place where I was living wasn't great, but it would do. And I started to kind of repair my life a little bit. So I went home for Christmas that year, and it was unusually nice. It was loving, it was warm, there were lots of lovely gifts. We played a board game, which never happened before. I now know this was all love bombing, of course. And I went back to my flat and I phoned my parents and I said, thank you for a lovely Christmas. It was really nice to see you, blah, blah, blah. The next thing I know, I get a text from my dad. Do not phone us again. Both of us have bad hearing. Which, of course, is a load of rubbish because they'd taken multiple phone calls over Christmas. And I now know this was a devalue. I believe they saw me happy and healing, and that just wouldn't do. I believe also the refusal to be guarantor was because they wanted me to beg them for their spare room, and I didn't. And then at Christmas, they wanted me to be a complete mess so that they could say, oh, just stay here. Don't go back to your flat. Stay here with us. So they had to devalue me. And this devaluation dragged on for 6 years. It was made very clear to me that I was unworthy, I was worthless, I'd lost this prestigious job. So I was no longer valuable for clout, for my mum to swan around church, lording it over people. Oh, my daughter's got this great job, and oh, look, it's all me. Oh, she gets all her talent from me. I was now on benefits and a bum. So the devalue continued. I was kept at arm's length. I think also now that they realised that I was exposed to mental health professionals who were telling me, you're being abused, and this frightened them. And so we have the silent treatment that kicked in last May, which was due to me telling my brother I could no longer cope with my mother's Munchausen's, her sending me texts every day with her latest made-up illness. And the silent treatment, initially I was extremely depressed. I thought about ending my life. But my good old subconscious kicked in again and said, no, this cannot continue. Look at the big picture, look at the patterns. This has been going on far too long. I tried to tell you when I sent you crazy, because when I had my breakdown, I had delusions. And the two main ones were my parents weren't my real parents. I had real parents that were desperately looking for me, who loved me. And the other one was that my mother was poisoning me from hundreds of miles away, which was obviously crazy. But I'd recently realised that she'd subjected me to fake illnesses as a child. So there was truth in those delusions. And speaking to mental health professionals, their conclusion was my breakdown was triggered, obviously by my father's behaviour, but also my brain no longer being able to handle two realities: the real world and the narc world, and the facade, and maintaining this fake facade. And my brain essentially said, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore. And my subconscious took over. And while it's been a horrendous 6 years, it's also been, it was the beginning of the end for the narcs when I went into hospital. And I'm actually grateful for that breakdown, because it woke me up. If I hadn't have had that breakdown, I probably would have fallen for this bizarre plan that my father had to buy a flat, put me in it, and make my brother the landlord. Which is even more bizarre when you consider this man allowed me to become homeless. And I think the homelessness thing, and them probably wanting me to take their spare room, this flat plan was their attempt to get control of me and have me under their thumb, because I've been independent all since 1994, and they thought my breakdown would be their opportunity to get me back, but that fell through. And so going no contact, I think, is the final message to them, that you will never control me. I'm not falling for it, and I'm awake and aware of your scheming and your planning and all your patterns. I know what you're about. So my reason for sharing this, I must admit, part of it is I want to expose them in an anonymous way, but also as a cautionary tale of what can happen when narc abuse goes on too long. It can break you, literally break your brain. And for the younger viewers out there, it's telling you, get out while you can, because the longer it drags on, the worse impact it'll have on your mental health. People may be concerned, it's a bit cruel going no contact though, and, loyalty to the family. Your mental health comes first. You need to protect yourself. No contact is an act of self-preservation. It's not a passive-aggressive manipulation tool like the silent treatment. It's literally saving your life. So if you're still on the fence about no contact, just consider my story of what can happen if you leave it too long. So with that, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much for listening to my story. Bye bye.